realize college students today, less than 2% of them want to go into sales. The only career that is lower than that is that of professional speaker. I literally was across the Hudson River on the streets of New York City as a street vendor selling cheap gold-plated jewelry outside of Rockefeller Center. But this, I believe, was the impetus for why I am standing here today. Because while I sucked selling jewelry on the streets outside of Rockefeller Center, I began observing what the other street vendors who were good at their craft were doing. And I started writing notes about each and everything that I saw that they were doing that I wasn't. I kept about 1,000 notes from that time to today. I'm still doing it. I have over 1,000 notes. I went from a rough notebook, I now have it in a fancy Excel spreadsheet. I've really advanced. But over 1,000 notes. And then I took those 1,000 notes and I condensed them into a book that I call The Sales Shot, which is about 100 of them. And then from that 100, I've condensed it to three really great ideas that I think salespeople like you might benefit from. What I found on the streets of New York City and all the jobs that I have had ever since is it's not that picture. Sales is more about helping. Sales is more about serving. It's finding out what the other person needs and wants and filling those needs. That's what real selling is all about. Just about every company website, think about just about every PowerPoint slide that you see. About us is everywhere. And it's filled with information that nobody cares about. Honestly. Nobody cares what year your company started. It does put the audience to sleep. Nobody cares about how many square feet you have. Nobody cares how many employees. Nobody cares how many countries you're in unless they're in the country that you're in. That's the only thing that matters. But more companies and more people make this mistake. It's unbelievable. Change the thought process, just like we did in the room just a couple of minutes ago. Make it about them, not about you. Important things that we do in selling is forming a connection. You have to form a connection before you can move on to the next step. And to form a connection, it really helps if the person that you're talking with likes you. Salespeople for 100 years have been trying to get people to like them. And there's one absolute way to get another person to like you. It's almost indefensible. 4 stereo stores. The first 3 were all the same, but I walked into the 4th stereo store, and I was standing there, and I was looking at the rack of receivers, when out of the side came a voice that said, "Don't buy that stereo." And I knew immediately this guy was different. I said, "Why?" "Can I ask you a few questions?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "Where are you buying the stereo for?" I said, "My apartment." And he said, "What room are you going to put it in?" I said, "My living room." He said, "What kind of music do you like?" I said, "Rock and roll, sometimes country, because my girlfriend likes country." And he goes, "Do you like to crank it up or do you like it soft?" And I said, "Well, it depends on my mood." And he asked question after question after question till he eventually got to the point where he said, "I know exactly what you want, sir." And he walked over and said, "This is the perfect stereo for you." Guess where I bought the stereo? No, on the internet, because, I just... He was an 18-year-old retail salesperson, completely changed it by asking questions. Now, if an 18-year-old retail stereo sales guy could do it, can't we do that in our business? Absolutely. The key is questions. I was sitting with a friend of mine who happens to be an airline pilot. And I said to him, "Man, I have always wanted to be a pilot." And he looked at me and he said, "So what's stopping you?" And I didn't have an answer. And I went home that night and I didn't get any sleep, and it was gnawing at me and gnawing at me. And then the next morning I'm making breakfast with my wife, and I go to the refrigerator to get some milk, and there's no milk. So I have to go to the convenience store to get some milk. So I start driving to the convenience store, and then I take this slight misdirection for about 6 miles, where I wind up at the local airport, which is about 6 miles from my house. And I walk in there, and I go to the counter, and there's a woman sitting behind the counter, and I go up and I say, hey, you know what, I'm interested about learning about flying lessons. Without saying a word, she turns and points to the guy standing next to the counter. And he looks at me and he said, if you're serious about taking flying lessons, we could do your first lesson right now. So imagine this. Imagine this. You are now walking out of this airport with your new friend, the flight instructor, and you are heading straight towards a 4-seat Cessna airplane. Your new friend, the flight instructor, circles you around the plane and introduces you to flight safety. And then he opens the door on the left side of the airplane and invites you to have a seat. Anybody know what the left side is for? You're darn right. That's the captain. That's where he's sitting. That's where you're now sitting. Flight instructor gives you a little bit more instruction about flight safety. The next thing you know, you are now taxiing the airplane down towards the end of the runway, where you eventually stop short at the end of this runway. And this flight instructor senses that you're a little bit nervous, and he asks you, what is it that you do for a living? And you say, I'm a BASF salesperson. I'm a BASF salesperson. Why? And he said, don't worry about it. Flying an airplane is a lot like being a BASF salesperson. And you say, oh, really? How's that? He said, well, there's 3 reasons.